Okay, so this is how it goes. The particle is controlled by us, being self. Self controls the particle. The particle responds and reacts and does what it does based on what self wants. The particle is then influenced and responds and reacts to what the self wants and relays that and communicates that with the wave. The wave is the field. So the wave is interacting with the field and it's responding to the particle. So that then determines the pathway for the particle. The particle is directed by self, self directs the particle. The wave is in communication with the field because it is part of the field, and the wave therefore then directs and causes, it basically makes it happen. It makes whatever the intention is of the observer, because that is the observer effect. We are observing the particle, therefore our intention of that thing gets put into the particle, and the particle reads that intention from self, therefore reacts to that intention and chooses that pathway by interacting with the wave, which is in the field, and that will take that particle to the pathway that it needs to take. And it's all based on who the observer is, what's happening, where it's going, is what determines it. It's really just that simple. Consciousness is the field. The field exists outside our body. Our body engages and interacts with it, but it exists outside our body. We download consciousness, we take consciousness from the field, and we have that projected through our mind. Our mind is the screen, the projector, that we see all of these potentials. So what happens with wave function collapse? Wave function collapse is when, let's represent the particle again as self. Wave function is that when that particle is making that decision and it's referring and conferring with self, which way are we going to go? That particle moves through the wave. The wave collapses down upon the wave as the particle draws back to self. It draws back into itself to be able to get that information. So in a moment it collapses the wave while it's like it races quickly inside and says, hey mum, can I go out here to do this? Do you want to do that? Is that what we're doing? What are we doing? You know, it checks the plans with self. It sees which path, what's the intention of the observer. So that particle will then push through the wave at center, will push through the wave and come back to self. But what happens is these two waves, they don't completely collapse as one thinks. These two waves then become these possible outcomes that were never potentiated because we chose a different path. Those potentials on the ends of these waves, they they stay apart. They do not join, they don't actually fully collapse down. They actually will remain out in the furthest of the field away from self. So that's what our past becomes. Our past becomes these parts of the field that are furthest from us. Okay, that's why we can forget things after we do them and such, because as soon as our field does no longer engage with that event or experience, then what it does is it just changes it. It just fades out into these lines, into these parts of the field that are furthest away from self. So it will be a part of a field that is possibly, entangled with millions of other people in another scenario. That will take this pathway out to those millions of other people. This pathway might be, going out to, I don't know, something else. But what it is the particle will come back to self. That is what wave function collapse is. I was shown through astrology symbolism, through the Leo sign and the Sun sign, and through the Uranus sign. So for starters, Uranus, and this is backwards, but it's a bit hard. So this is particle, this is wave. This is the field. It is all entangled. Everything is merging with one another. See that communication? Everything is entangled here. This is the field. This is the wave. And this is the particle. As the particle, what the particle does in its response, and when it draws back to self, remember I said how it turns within itself, turns back to self. This particle will turn back to self to confer with self, to say, hey, what are we doing? You know, what's the intention? Now we're talking, this is all very micro time. There is no time, but this is in what we would measure as micro time. So the particle then, what this does is this part here, the wave and the particle, they actually start, if you could imagine them, because this is how I was visually shown, this actually goes backwards and it starts pulling on this string here, the connection between the field. And what that wave does is it actually pushes that string further inwards to self, and then these two realities, these two parts of the field, come together and draw together and close over, and now that particle is now off on another pathway. And then they showed me this. This is the sign of Leo and the sign for the sun. Sun is source, sun is everything. It's all light. We are light. And sound. Light and sound. So what happens is if we turn that into particle and wave, the particle goes and it joins in and it merges with the wave. It interacts with the wave. It draws down lower into this part, which is self. It turns back into self. Everything comes back to self because everything we see and everything we experience is a projection from our own consciousness. So, which is shared, but it's our version of that consciousness. So this particle travels down through the wave, down into self, which is back into self. And the further it keeps going, what it does is it, if I can represent it some way to show you, it just, now there is more complexity that I could explain in another video, but this one. So then it turns into what looks and appears to persons who are aware of astrology and divination tools. This looks much like we have the Sun in Aries, which we know are heavily related. And then we also have the High Priestess. So this is a stage of coming back to self. This here is what this wave has now engaged, interacted, and is participating with this particle. That's the next stage. See how these arms have now enveloped the particle, and they're now engaging with the membrane, the field, the outermost surface, whatever you want to call it, because it all doesn't matter. The truth is much simpler than you think. And the wave actually engages with that sun, the particle, and starts enveloping it like that. Then the next stage is that the particle is now heavily enveloped by that wave, fully got all of its information relaying and transfer between the two, because the wave is reading the field out here, the particle is reading you because it's turned within self, which is this process. So now the wave's collapsed. The wave is now enveloped the particle. It has now become into a dualistic communicative state where they're both operating very momentarily to determine the next outcome, because everything's moment by moment. That's why you will never measure such a thing. Everything is moment by moment, and everyone has a different projection of those moments to moments, even though we have a combined collective consciousness. So you cannot measure. It's like trying to measure everyone's experience all at once. You just can't do it. That's what Source is. Source is experiencing itself, and you would have to be Source to know that. And that's why we, at this level of awareness and consciousness, not that anything's greater than us outside of ourselves, it's just that our awareness and consciousness is not developed enough to be able to understand it. But this is my understanding and how I've been shown.